I came across a video on the YouTube, actually two videos about the same topics, titled The History of Language Teaching in 100 Moves, Part 1 and Part 2. It offers detailed explanation of what the evolutionary cycle of language teaching went through so far. And so what we have to know about it is that up to the 16th century Latin was used, and wherever you went to Europe you could just use Latin, and there was no need to learn any other language beside that. So, but around the 16th century the Latin lost its importance, and people turned toward their own languages, and they became more interested in learning the native tongue of their neighbors and other people, and more and more people stopped learning Latin, and then Latin just went out of fashion. So at that time a Czech scholar by the name, I think J was pronounced in Czech language "j", or if it's a Latin, probably it's a Latin name. Comenius sounds very Latin, maybe it's a Johann or Johann. Amos Comenius, who died in 1670, and he summarized what he thought of an ideal method of teaching languages, and here is his summary. He emphasized on the use of imitations instead of rules. Somewhat debatable. He thought that the teacher should have the students repeat the language after them. And then he said, limit vocabulary initially. Agree. Teacher helps the student in reading and write and speaking. That was probably the main task of a teacher. Then he proposed to teach through pictures. It's a good way for the start. Yeah. There came later in the 18th century came a German gentleman, Wilhelm von Humboldt. He said something that I wrote in red here, and basically if he had not said this, probably the whole language learning would have gone a different direction. But with this he expressed the ignorance of those days, and by saying this he probably chiseled it into stone for the academics to be blocked by. And this is what he said: a language cannot be taught. We can only create conditions for learning to take place. Voila, a language cannot be taught. Now, what does this tell us is that at that time, in that environment, they had no idea how a language was made. They had absolutely no idea that the language is a system understandable understandable by the human mind, or for the human mind, and there can be a way to teach it. So that was the 18th century. There comes 19th century. Language teaching somewhat changed a little bit in its minor details. Spoken language should be taught first. That was a new thing, and I agree with it. Phonetic training to improve pronunciation was emphasized. Phonetic Association was founded in 1889, and they made the phonetic alphabet. Phonetic is not bad. Inductive approach to teach grammar. That means somehow they systematize grammar so that it's easy to understand. One thing follows the other, and then step by step a student can acquire an understanding of it. Using target language to make meaning associations. This means that they used the language they were teaching to explain meanings in that language. Then came the 20th century, and late 20th century actually, Michael Lewis. He created the lexical approach, and in 1993 he published the book The Lexical Approach, and in 1997 he published another book, The Implementation of the Lexical Approach. Alright, what was this like? Students should develop more stock phrases and less time on grammar. Less time on grammar, I agree. I'm not a friend of grammar because I have a very bad opinion about grammar. Students should develop more stock phrases. This probably helps in the beginning. But this is not the method that will make you learn the language A to Z. Sensitize the students to probabilities of common combinations and acceptable collocations. So here he thought that it's important to make the students focus on what is commonly used in the language, and that is not a bad idea. There came Scott Thornberry, and he created the dogma language learning. Dogma, probably from dogma. So his considerations that got a priority in the teaching are provide opportunities for language to emerge by creating rich environment full of affordances. Wow. Okay, what does this mean? It means that here we can see that here the language learning, how a language is learned, what the mind has to go through and what work the mind has to done became somewhat unimportant. And then the method of teaching the language, the way we do things in the class became more important. And secondly, do something with the language. Retrieve, reward, report, recycle, or record it. I don't exactly know what this means, but it sounds very superfluous to me, because I have obviously a different approach to the whole thing. And then lastly, draw attention to the features of the language that the students might not notice. Agree. In the mathematical English system, I also first format the mind of the students, and then after that I teach details that the students is not likely to notice or give emphasis to before I go to other parts which the students automatically desires to learn. Okay, now, so this, we start with Johann Amos and we end with Scott Thornberry from 16th to 20th century. What do we understand from here? Well, none of them created a system of teaching the language. They were proposing different methods of doing, and because of that, when you deal with the method number 2 here, emphasis was on the less important aspect of the language. So number 2 here, emphasis on the less important aspect, because they could not systematize a language learning curriculum, so they had no other way but to emphasize on things that are not directly and importantly responsible for imparting the knowledge in the students. So what are these less important aspects? If you see the video, some of them, sometimes it was believed that Language teacher doesn't have to know the language that he is teaching. I completely disagree. Okay, and then here imitations are emphasized, pictures in the class are emphasized, then repetitions emphasized, then dialogue and text emphasized. I kind of agree with both of them, but it is for the purpose of memorizing phrases and idioms. Disagree. Inductive approach to grammar emphasized. Disagree. Using target language to make meaning associations, to explain things in the language you are teaching, wasting your time. If you know the meaning of the words in the student's language, just give it to him. It's his duty to go home and memorize it. Then develop more stock phrases. Helps in the beginning, not that important. Sensitize the students to probabilities of common combinations. He will learn them anyway. Provide opportunities for language to emerge. Not necessarily students are in the class because they want to learn the language, those that are sincere in their studies, and so on and so on. So emphasis was on a less important aspect of the language. Wrong target for memory work, number 3, is a problem here. They emphasizing on learning phrases, idioms, what was it, stock phrases, right? So memory was basically for stock phrases here, limit memory for limit vocabulary initially. Memory is basically in the mathematical English system is for 2 things: for vocabulary to remember and for the numerical formula to remember when it is time to apply. Then we have number 4, the role of grammar. As we can see that grammar was more important back in the olden days than nowadays. And then here Michael Lewis wants to spend less time on grammar, and then Scott Thornbury doesn't even mention that it should be part of the teaching method. But we have inductive approach to teach grammar in the 19th century. Then number 5 problem of all this is that these are methods, and these methods are for the teachers and not for the students. These are not methods of how to impart the knowledge, the language in the student. These are methods of what to do with the class. Of course, for the student, it has no value what the teacher is doing. Students only can value what he takes with him at the end of the class. The number 6, there is a complete disregard and I think ignorance of how a language is made and learned. We cannot blame the Westerners of not knowing about languages, because their language came very late and the circumstances that gave birth to their language were not very, how would I say, were not very positive, and they were not in the position where they could just find out how to do things best. Their languages mostly came about for political reasons, and probably and definitely not by linguists and scholars or whoever knew how to make languages. Now, number 7, the problems with this, which I already hinted in the previous points, that these are methods and not curriculums. The method of teaching a language should be innate in the curriculum. That means once the curriculum is well done, it doesn't really matter what method you use to impart that curriculum, because whether you teach with pictures or whether you have inductive approach to grammar or whether you spend less time on grammar or whether you have a rich environment full of affordances, all this do not matter at all. Yeah? So the point here is that this is the evolution of language learning, and still it could not produce a curriculum that stands above all. And the reason, in my understanding, reasons are many, but I think this sentence, language cannot be taught, is much to do with it. Because you see, this is the academic line, and whatever follows from ignorance, it will be essentially ignorance until a complete break of whatever was there before takes place and something entirely new emerges. And so that has taken place, and that is called the mathematical English system. Now, how is this system different from all the others? For one, we have to notice that the mathematical English system is called a system. Here they never use the word system. These are methods. Now, a system and a method is essentially different. To explain it very shortly, I would say a system of circulation would be to put a policeman with the radio at every crossroad and ask them to direct the traffic. And then that would be a method. There can be many other methods. There can be policemen without radio, just flags or whatever method you can imagine. A system is what we have. We have lines on the road, we have traffic lights, we have signboards, we have all kinds of ads that indicate things by the roadside and all these things. And it is a system, and so long as we adhere to this system, we benefit from it. And that means the system does things that otherwise we would have to deal with. Okay, so what's the main difference of the math from all this? First, it is a curriculum. It is not a method of what a teacher should do. That is free. Teacher can decide. It's a curriculum that imparts the skeleton of English language in the student's brain. And since it's a system, number 2 here, it's obvious that it has to be integrated, because a system is a goal-oriented sequence of the actions the system performs, okay, or the system is conducting. Okay, and number 3 is a curriculum integrated, and number 3 is a system. System I already explained. Yeah, system works for the students. Then number 4 is goal-oriented. It's goal-oriented because all these gentlemen here, all these linguists do not realize that learning a language is a process, and there has to be a sequence of emphases. That means what's important in the beginning may not be important in the later stage, and so on and so on. And the goals here are not determined, but in the mathematical English system, shortly I will explain. And then after that, number 5, is that is natural. Natural means that it is exactly the way our mind learns a language, and it is in accordance with that. And it is not a method that maybe is in accordance, maybe it goes against. It's not like that. Number 6 difference between this and the math is that the math is the ultimate. The math is finally a curriculum that systematically imparts knowledge in the student's mind, and at the end of which the student acquires the complete skeleton of English language, after which he will never need an English teacher ever again. Okay, now I mentioned that it's a goal-oriented curriculum, so let's go through the goals. First, here is a knee missing. First goal is to build a bridge between the two minds. The mathematical English system is the only two-minded teaching system. That means early on it starts building an English mind in the student's mind and a bridge between them where information can travel. The next goal after that, once that one is achieved, is to compose a speech in English. Here the student learns how to put a speech together, but still using his own language, his own native words. But his thoughts are in English. Then after that, once he's successful in that and he's able to compose a speech of, let's say, half a page, then he has to do that spontaneously, to speak a speech in English, also in his own language yet. Compose a speech and then write a speech in English. Here, when he writes the speech in English, number 3, then he slowly turns the words that he is using into English, as well as he picks up vocabulary gradually. And then number 4, he speaks the speech that he composes in English. That means he thinks and speaks, just like he wants to use the language. Then number 5, goal number 5 is he has to learn is asking questions. He has to learn how to ask the questions, because questions have to be asked very quickly, because in a speech you have to throw it in before the speech goes to another topic or goes away from what you want to ask. And then so up to number 4 he learns how to answer questions, but number 5 he learns how to ask a question. Then number 6, once he knows how to ask and how to answer questions, then the goal is to converse in English. As you can see, it's a process to reach there. But use of dialogues and text for phrases and idioms. So here in the 19th centuries they were starting the language curriculum by what is actually the aim of learning a language. And number 7, to upgrade his language to acquire the complete skeleton of English language. And this, until here it is the math. And then there is one more stage to go, and that is to specialize. If a student comes and he's a doctor, he will want to talk about medicine and he will need those words and those expressions. If he's a lawyer, then he will need a different language. And then specialization is not part of the math. Specialization is another way for the business to continue. Once the complete skeleton of the English language is acquired, then can foster the students to specialize in business or specialize in the law or poetry or whatnot. And this is where business takes over. In the traditional methods, all this comes, if it comes, after the business priorities. And that is why traditional methods don't work, and wherever the math will be implemented, it's no question that the people who decide to learn English will choose the math over the traditional ways. Because when you go into a language school and there they start saying that here we teach you English the exact same way you learned your mother tongue, then you say, well, okay. But wherever you go after that, whichever school you go where they cannot say this, they have no way to win your mind over. If a school cannot win over your mind with their curriculum and the way they operate their business, then it's very unlikely that you will join their courses. And if most people in the market have the same attitude, then it's very logical to think that those kind of schools will be out of business when the time comes. Now, to close this, I would like to draw attention to 2 points that I mentioned before. One is that the math is a curriculum, and the other one, the last one, is that it's the ultimate system. All the rest, integrated, systematic, goal-oriented, natural, all this falls in between. Now, what do we need to know about a curriculum versus a method of teaching? Well, okay, let's imagine a classroom where the curriculum is kind of sluggish or not really goal-oriented or confusing. There, only the teaching ability of the teacher can make a difference for the students. If the teacher is good, then still they can learn English, still they can like the language, still they want to continue attending the classes in the school. Now, in this way, one person with all his charisma, how many people he can keep attending the class? Let's say a handful. Let's say every class you give him, he will be able to keep the student coming. And he has, let's say, 3 or 4 classes, and we can say he teaches 200 people a day. Then 5 days a week, then you have, let's say, if the school is very good, he would be teaching like close to 1,000 students, right? Now, that's an extreme example. A teacher never teaches 1,000 students a week, forget it. Yeah? But it's just 1,000 because it's a one-man's business. If the curriculum ensures the progress and guarantees the result that is sought after by the market or the students. I don't like to call them the market. They are individuals, and they are not the market. They are students, and the teachers are servants. So, if the curriculum ensures the desirable result, then whoever joins that curriculum will have, logically thinking, the same percentage of chance to succeed in English. Now let's say, in the case of the math, I would say that the success rate is 90 to 95%. I have had one student who could not learn, but she could not learn any other way simply because she was too lazy to memorize words, and without words there is no language. I gave her about 50 words in Korea to memorize, and after a month she still couldn't know them. I tested and she didn't know them. So you have to know that the Korea and Japan, the curriculums in schools are so memory oriented that these students have excellent memories. So I would say that an average Korean student would memorize 50 words in 2 hours, maybe less. She didn't do it in a month, so eventually soon after, in a week or something, the class stopped and I was happy about it. So there are, I would say, 5% or maybe 10% of the students who will not succeed in the maths, but the 90 others will compensate in terms of business and in terms of academic success. And when the curriculum is that well done from the students' perspective, then if you have good teachers in the school, of course, it's a plus. It's always a plus if you've got a fun attitude and has a good way to control the class and can make the children love attending the classes. But when the curriculum is the main, how would I say? The curriculum is the one that's mainly responsible for the success of the school, then what happens is that the school is much bigger. Because instead of a teacher who can teach 1,000 students, a curriculum can spread nationwide. Wherever, whichever city you open a school, that ensures a 90% success rate. Now, of course, with good teachers, such a school can raise it close to 100. Yeah? And if it has a good selection program, which I don't think that schools favor because they don't like to turn away students, but if they come up with the way to determine whether the student is likely to be successful in his or her studies, or it is better to tell him or her or the parents, don't waste money on this, wait another year or two and then come back and it will be better for your child, you know. Then the success rate with the math and good teachers can scratch the surface of the 100%, I would say. Now, the curriculum and the teacher's ability is kind of how do you say, not reverse proportion we say. The better the curriculum, the less the school has to rely on the teachers. That's what I want to say. So that's why the curriculum is so important. Now, let me give you an example. In Korea, I practice Taekwondo. And in Korea, they have a very rigorous and very competition-oriented training system. And they started from middle school all the way up to university, and then the final goal, of course, now is the Olympic. And when I started training in Korea, I noticed that there is not much personal touch between the trainers and the students, Taekwondo students, the way I saw it elsewhere. During the training and outside training, of course there is, but the system takes over inside the training, inside the class. That the system gets the emphasis. Why? Because the system produces quantity. And if the system is made a way, in this case the curriculum is made the way that it does not just guarantee quantity but also quality, then that system is a jackpot. And in Korea, in Taekwondo, they have that. If you send 1,000 students on their way, they go through the process, maybe 10 will come out brilliant, excellent, ready for the Olympics, but Korea need only one in each category, weight category, and then Korea has a very high percentage of chance to win the medal. So this is what we have to know about curriculum. In the absence of good curriculum, the school has to rely on the teachers, but a curriculum that ensures quality and quantity is a I think that from what has been said so far, it is clear to you now. Next, the ultimate nature of the curriculum. Why I say is ultimate? Because in the progress of teaching languages, there is only so much we can improve. And if you think ahead, what we really look for is a way to learn a language the way we learned our mother tongue, because that was effortless and that's everybody's experience, and it was relatively fast. But with the math, it's 4 times faster, I would say. Why? Because with 1 class a week, the math program would be done probably in 1.5 years, but maximum to, let's say, 2 years. 2 years. And when a child is born, starts speaking at 3, let's say, and around the age of 10, he or she can speak complex sentences and read books and all that. So let's say it takes 8 years to learn the mother tongue for a person. And then with the math, you do it in 2 years. You do it in 2 years, maximum 2 years. Before that, also you can accomplish the whole thing. Why is it faster? Because as a child you face hindrances in your language learning. I can think of 3. One is that you hear limited language. They don't talk very difficult language to you when you're just a child, right? Because you wouldn't understand anyway. Second, you hear distorted languages, like there is a car and then they say doo-doo, or a cat a meow or something, you know, distorted language, and then you think that's what it is, but it's not like that, right? And then third is the greatest obstacle is that your mind is not yet developed to handle complex linguistic situations, right? So you just have to wait until your mind develops enough to handle very difficult sentence patterns. And as an adult, you don't have all this. Plus, you have the experience of already learning 1 or more languages. And then, because of that, you have the means to compare. So your mind is already healthy and grown up and is wide. And if you have the math program, then a person, any other person, can learn the same way as he learned his mother tongue, but 4 times faster. Now the same way here, like I said in other videos, the same way doesn't mean by the same method, because basically the method for a child to learn a language is not to get any explanation, just take in data and rely on his natural ability to forge a language out of all this. But this natural ability later we lose. Now, the math can reinitiate those functions of the mind, and I will explain this later in another video. Can reinitiate this and make it possible for an adult to learn a language as a child. Of course, as a child you can't measure the burden of your effort, that means how hard it is, because everything is just fun. As an adult you can. So while learning with the math, you will not have the same light, easy feeling of mindlessness as a child because you're conscious of your effort. But you only need to do it for 2 years. And if you're conscious of that too while you're learning, that compensates for all the hardship, I would say. And with this, I end this video.